The lie, first off, is that you have to accumulate a bunch of debt to go and be a success in the real world.
It is really sad seeing college debt and how the common, regular, average human being has just become a victim of the institution of modern college.
It's almost like starting a race half a mile behind all the other contestants. So if I'm running like a 5K and I have to like run an extra half mile, like that's such a disadvantage.
If someone has to go into debt, it's because they can't afford it. It's never a money issue, it's a self-worth issue. The only reason that the government and government-funded universities and all of these institutions completely funded by the people that rule the country is if you go into that much debt, they will have that much more on you and you will be that much more reliant on other people's money, especially the people that want control over you the most.
You can't really go pursue what you want to pursue if you're really stuck in a deep hole that you have to climb out of. And it's like I said, it's sad because I want to see people innovate, right? I want to see people build big things. I want to see people accomplish that. All right, guys, we are back at it.
With Eclipse Podcast, here we are. Max, I'm Max. He's Harrison.
Yep.
And last episode, it's great. It was a fun time.
Yeah.
But now we're here.
Kind of just an intro to Eclipse and what we're doing, but I'm really excited. Like we're actually going to start getting in the weeds of some of these topics that are so near and dear to our heart.
Of the broken system of traditional education.
Yeah, exactly.
How fun. Okay, well, today, you guys saw it in the title. What are we talking about, Harrison?
Today we are talking about college debt.
Uh-oh.
And how big college, big academia, the college regime, you know, really how much that really affects a lot of young people. And specifically, you know, some of the lies that we've been told about college debt, right? And what that actually looks like and that means. So we're just gonna stab it in the face.
I'll say this, there's going to be a lot of information here, so just get ready to take in a lot of information. We're going to package it as best we can for you guys. But it is really sad seeing college debt and how really, I mean, the common, regular, average human being has just become a victim of the institution of modern
absolutely.
college. It's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, and I know somebody, he's a nurse. Wife's a nurse, he's a nurse. And, you know, he unfortunately is in this debt cycle where he won't ever be able to buy a house, right? He won't ever really to financially, unless he gets, you know, a raise or whatever that may be. But I think everyone knows someone that probably is stuck in some kind of cycle that is related to college debt that's really hard to get out of. Or, you know, on the latter, if someone gets out of it, it's a big deal. And they throw a celebration, they're happy. I remember when I was little, when my mom, she paid her last little bit in college debt. And it was so much fun. It was like this like hooray moment that we had that, you know, unfortunately, not a lot of people get that, right? A lot of people are stuck in that and it's continual.
And it's even that celebration is congratulations, you're back at zero.
Exactly.
It's like there's this video of Trump and he was talking and he goes, I was walking down the street with a girl and I looked to my right and there was a homeless guy. And I looked and I said, that homeless guy is worth like, I forgot the number, but let's just say like $3 billion more than I am.
He's worth $3 billion more than me, let me tell you.
Yeah. No one's ever seen a homeless guy that rich.
No one's ever seen
it. Yeah.
Such a prestigious homeless man. Let me tell you, $3 billion richer than me.
Yeah, but she just didn't believe him. And then he said, well, I'm $3 billion in debt. So that proves it for you. And it's like, I mean, obviously that wasn't college, but anyway. So Harrison, getting right into it, I stand against long intros on podcasts, so I apologize for that, that I had to be that person. But Harrison, I want you to start and just define what is college debt, what's the lie we've been told, and what is the truth?
Yeah, so I think the lie, first off, is that you have to accumulate a bunch of debt to go and be a success in the real world. Or that for whatever reason that I have to go kind of put myself in a hole in order to get out of it. Like that's essentially what college debt is. It's
how
like
do they convince you of that though?
Yeah, I think that there's multiple ways of conviction. I think social pressure, like this lie that, you know, you have to go to college, right? You have to do traditional systems. You have to go to this kind of college, right? For some reason that some private university is better than, you know, a public school option or what we're doing here at Eclipse or, you know, some other form of education. So I think that there's the lie in understanding that I have to go to, you know, an expensive high school and that will somehow relate to my output in my life. So I think that's number one, but I like to think about it like, it's like if I'm starting a race, for me to go take out a student loan and accumulate a bunch of debt, that's going to compound on itself, right? It's just like, that's something that, right now, or at least over the last, couple of years, like there was a pause in debt payments by the federal government. That's going to start coming right back, and people are going to have to start paying their college debt again. But it's almost like starting a race half a mile ahead or behind all the other contestants. So if I'm running like a 5K and I have to like run an extra half mile, like that's such a disadvantage of me. Yet that's just this lie that we tell every 18-year-old, hey, if you don't come from the top 10%, right? If you're right in the middle, you have to go to college, right? And with that, you have to go take on it's so easy to get your hands on student loans. I would say it's a lot easier to do that to get a business loan, right? Or some other line of credit, which, you can make the Dave Ramsey case, don't take credit at all. Which we can maybe have another podcast on that. But yeah, I think the accessibility of college loans for a lot of young people, and the ability to get their hands on that, as well as kind of, universities seeing that, knowing those systems exist, and, kind of preying on students anyways, and expecting them to do that.
How do they, well, how, so one, I want to answer, or I want you to answer a couple of misconceptions. Who are the demanders of student debt, and why do they want kids to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars? And why is tuition so, I mean, obviously inflation plays a role, but why is college objectively?
Actually, inflation in a lot of ways. So if we look back at 1980, so, tuition has skyrocketed about, I think it's 12, I'm not going to say the exact number, so I'll round up, about 1,300%. The rate of inflation, the CPI, which is just a fancy word of saying how much goods and services has increased, basically like milk at the grocery store, right? Or eggs, or a car, all that is kind of compiled into the CPI, which is just a measurement. It's only been 236% since about the 1980s, right? And so like you see the college tuition rates is not actually, you said inflation, that's actually not true. It's 4.2.
So it has nothing to do with inflation.
It's almost
Wow,
four and a
that's
half
interesting.
times more than that of the CPI.
So why is tuition that much more expensive now? And I mean, we've talked about this before, but it used to be where people could pay their own way through college.
Yeah, and I know like you talk to any old guy, it's like, I've heard stories of old dudes saying, yeah, I worked a summer job. I was able to make enough money to pay my way through school. It's like, ooh,
yeah,
good luck doing that, dude.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, so.
I don't know what summer job.
I know
what summer job people would have these days to be able to do.
I know, and then if you're making that much money, it's like, should you even be going to school? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the most interesting ones that we've seen over the last 20 years, specifically since the 80s, both actually in higher education as well as a lot of K through 12 public schooling, is bloat, right? And what I mean by bloat is that you have more administrative overhead costs, basically that you have more staff that you really probably don't need. So not actual professors, right? In the K through 12 example, not actually teachers, not actually people necessarily benefiting the life of the student or the educational pursuit of the student.
Go deeper on that.
So yeah, so administrative just meaning that like some back office employee that is doing something
that has nothing to do with the kid.
That has nothing to do, I think, specifically with the kid's education. There's another reason. I was talking to one of the head of the economic department at a pretty well-known university not too long ago. He's a friend of mine, really solid dude. We actually had this conversation, and I said, what is, from an academic view of the world, why is college so broken, specifically around tuition at your university? I made sure I said your university, just so we didn't go into too much. But, he said that, in his department, economics, in a weird way, it actually wasn't in the business schools and the liberal arts, and the School of the Arts at that university. And it was so interesting. His perspective was, with that overhead too, you have a lot of people getting bachelor's degrees in pretty like unique niche things that have no economic output, like gender studies, right? Or like the study
What
of,
even is that, bro?
well, a podcast
Conversation
for
for
another,
another
podcast for
time.
another time, or like, some like historical study of like let's say like the Roman history of the development of a bathhouse, right? Some weird thing that probably doesn't exist, but like, so like really niche examples like that you really only have a couple students, if that, graduating with these degrees. So you have these huge administrative costs for these programs that are not producing students.
So they're paying back office people that have nothing to do with the degree and the process itself.
Yes, or they're paying people that are, contributing to a student's education, but it's very few, right? And it's not something that will produce economic output. And so from a pure business example, right? If I'm running a company, right, and I want to clean up my operations, and I know that I'm selling product A, right? Product A is performing really, really well. People love product A. I have high margin on product A. I'm making money from it. And then I have product B that is absolute flop, right? I'm losing money, right? People don't like it. I'm getting upset. My customers are getting upset. No one's doing it. What am I going to do? I'm going to cut that out, right? I'm going to get rid of that product. Why? Because it's not making me money. And so, you have that with a lot of universities. What complicates it even more is there's kind of this collective, especially in his example, and he used, a lot of, the history and the arts examples he gave me, was that you kind of have this like collective, he used the word cult. I don't know if that's the best word. That's the word he used.
Interesting word. Yeah.
He said like, there's almost this weird collective cult with some of these professors where they kind of realize that, hey, this is all nonsense, right? This is not something that antiquates to value. And so because of that, he was like, man, like these are the most insecure people in the world that I've ever met. And, they are subconsciously really, really scared that, hey, if we get rid of this program, I'm next. And so whenever you have these discussions with the boards of some of these universities of evaluating, hey, should we get rid of this program? Like we only had 3 guys studying, the classic, development of poetry written by women in the 1900s in Slovakia, right? Something that's like really, really niche. That might sound good to a couple people, but for the general population, I don't really spend my time thinking of like Slovakian poetry, right? It's just me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the last time I ever called that. Except
Exactly.
just to make conversation.
Exactly. Sometimes it's a good conversation.
Sometimes it's a good conversation starter. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
depends
hey,
on the person.
Exactly. but that's like, it's so true though, is like, there really isn't that much economic value from that. And I know that could upset people, but it's just reality. Right?
So you're saying it's just not worth it?
It's not worth it. And two, I think it's like this political piece of it too, where it's like, oh, you can't get rid of this because this. And then you throw out this language where, it like in his words, it is very cultish, right? And that cultish is unfortunately out of insecurity because, everyone in life wants purpose, right? That's like the best thing, right? If you live a life of purpose, you have value. And some of these programs, they're not creating value. So if they artificially create it, and the best way of doing that is kind of this collective bargaining you see with, kind of like the union example of kind of how a lot of teacher unions also on the K through 12 example really leverage that say, hey, we need all these unnecessary administrative costs.
I think the problem I know the problem with the lie of college debt right now is people, culture, society is telling whoever they're enticing to go into college debt, which has become the cultural norm. They're telling them college, this education, what it's going to teach you is worth more than you are. Because the reality is if someone has to go into debt, it's because they can't afford it.
Yeah.
And it's never a money issue. It's a self-worth issue.
Yeah.
I think because they're telling you, hey, you can't do this on your own. You're not capable. So now you have to rely on government funding. You have to rely on the bank to give you a bunch of money because you're not worth enough. So you have to go in and pay yourself out of it and then spend the next 10, 12 years paying it back. And then you won't be able to build anything anyway like you would have before debt because you'll be so buried under everything that you won't be able to ever get another job except for corporate America.
Exactly. And I think that I guess more on the ideological perspective of that is, it is all about self-worth, right? For that example, it is exclusively about worth, right? And I can't really grapple with the fact what I've kind of wasted my time on doesn't have any societal benefit on a mass scale. I have to artificially create that. So that's, I guess, one reason, right? I think because of that reason, a lot of like, political headwinds you hear a lot come from that example of like, why are universities, swaying one way on the political scale? I think actually that's a huge reason for that. That's something, another podcast we can talk for another day. So that's number one. I think number two is the offset of cost, right? So every university wants to attract the best students. Admissions are getting cut really hard right now. It's about 5% since 2021. Admissions decline across the US.
And talk about admissions real quick. Go deeper on that, because if college was really made to serve student, I feel like a majority of colleges would at least have a higher admission rate. Yes.
Yeah. So admissions just being like there's been a decline 5% since 2021. This is adjusted after the pandemic. So, you could make the case this is all COVID inflated, but you have had a declining admissions rate since about 2008, right after the economy got settled after the recession. So we are in, relatively speaking, we are in, a downslope of how many people are actually applying to colleges. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of people, on the college debt question, there's this sticker shock effect where it's like, okay, like for as much money am I spending, is it worth it? And so I guess going back though, and you mentioned like another reason of, why it's getting so expensive, I think is, building, offsetting costs, administrative overhead. There's been a reliance on government funding that if that gets cut, then, the only way you can really subsidize those costs is increasing prices. So that's just a couple examples. Like, I think that, there's definitely other things at play that we could go into, but I think that's really the bulk of sort of why there is this extremely high cost in college right now.
I agree. And one thing I'll say is the only reason that the government and government funded universities and government backed universities and all of these institutions completely funded by the people that rule the country is if you go into that much debt, they will have that much more on you, and you will be that much more reliant on other people's money, especially the people that want control over you the most.
Absolutely.
And that's the goal. I mean, there's nothing more profitable in the university institute and the college regime, if you will, than a kid that doesn't know what he wants to do with his life.
No, absolutely.
There is nothing more profitable than a confused child, because then they can take you wherever they want because they're the only source of authority that you're actually going to look to. Because your parents, I mean, I'm talking about the average kid, your parents look to them. The government, you look to the government, and then where does the government point you? To their own institutions so you can make more money. It's the same thing with the pharmaceutical industry. It's the same thing with all of these different places, all of these different institutions where it's like, hey, come to me, and it all goes to the top, like just your average stereotypical pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
So
no, and I think that there's definitely wisdom in that. And it hasn't always been that way, right? So we look about 100 years ago, there's about 600,000 students, in the college system, predominantly, wealthy white guys that come from, wealthy families. And so really like you don't really start seeing, mass amount of college students really until right after World War II. You had the GI Bill, which is essentially, it was a government program that gave all veterans free college education.
And veterans were a lot younger back then.
Yeah,
I'm assuming
it was I don't know the age off the top of my head, but like fighting age men is typically between the ages of 18 to 26.
You don't have 60-year-old dudes out there slaying
no,
dragons.
not like you do in Ukraine right now. No, they're all pretty young. But yeah, so you had the GI Bill, and then in the 40s, and that was in the 40s. In the 60s, under the Kennedy administration in 1965, there's a thing called the National Defense Education Act that was passed. Effectively, we were in the Cold War with Russia, context of the time. So like it was kind of, a lot of tension on like, okay, like who has better technology? You had the space race where, Russia launched out Sputnik. I guess the Sputnik 2 that went into orbit. And then in 69, we, got the rocket to the moon effectively.
Did we? I'm just kidding.
I unpopular opinion. I think we did. Okay.
It is actually unpopular now, which is so interesting.
It is.
Conversation for another time.
Yeah.
I just
another
had to
conversation.
Say that.
We're just procrastinating on these conversations.
Exactly. We don't want to hit the nail on the head with college debt.
So yeah, in 65, what that program did is it really, it really gave financial opportunities and scholarship opportunities to kids in lower socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as the ability to start getting student loans. And so that's really when college debt really started, was in the 60s. And then fast forward maybe 20 years later, in the 80s, states started cutting costs to some of their higher education programs, which, effectively, the students have to pay, or then this university has to pay somehow. How do they do that? They raise tuition prices. So in like 1985, the average cost to go to a private university was like $17,000. That's adjusted for inflation, so that's relative to today's dollars. 10 years later is about $27,000 a year. Like I said, that's in today's dollars adjusted. So you start seeing that spike rise in tuition prices, and then you really start to see debt really start to amalgamate. So fact check me on this, but in the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, there was about $600 billion in student debt. Now there's about $1.7 trillion, which is, that's the real number, that has increased. In 2013, that's 1.3 billion, now 1.7, and that is continuing to rise. And as debt compounds on itself, some of those numbers will grow astronomically.
And I think it's obvious as well that, or actually, I know it's obvious that college objectively has demanded more money. All they've said is we need to make more money. Nobody asked why or who or how. They just said, okay, we're just going to charge more. And because they've been perceived and they've made themselves, the college regime has made itself seem so essential to the average American that it's like, oh, we need this. So it's obviously a scarcity thing in terms of education. And so I'm going to put all my money into this so I can be successful and I can make, a chance for myself. And the sad thing is that when they drive up these prices and they trick people into thinking that they actually need a college, a traditional college experience, now they've gone from serving students, like you were saying, in modern history in the 1900s, college was serving students, and now with the college regime, it's serving self.
Absolutely.
And it's terrible, and it's an awful thing.
You see the byproduct of that, right? It's like, for the average borrower, they have about $43,000 or $39,000 in student debt. So the average household with debt is about $45K, right? $45,000.
And that's the average. I mean, what does the average American make? 54?
Something around.
And most of those people went to college.
Exactly. And so it's like, wait a second, I have this crushing amount of debt, right? And that's not even, most people have other debt. If they own a house, right? Car payments.
But I would say the earliest debt that they go into is student loans.
Absolutely.
And they can't get out of it, and they have to keep going into debt in all the other areas because, again, just in the same way we said this last podcast, in the exact same way that innovation and succeeding these days starts with leaving traditional education, in the same way it starts with just don't go into that much debt. Absolutely. And then it will compile on itself.
And it's like this lie. It's like, I'll pay it off. But it's like, wait a second, 32% of borrowers are still over the age of 40, right? Or not still, they are over the age of 40. Listen to that. 32% of borrowers are over the age of 40.
So what does that mean?
It means they can't plan for retirement.
Yeah. That's
imagine
so
like,
sad.
Imagine like I have
so
this like
sad.
looming bill. I'm starting to get up there, right? It's like they're halfway there.
Yeah, it's like, finally my parents are,
it's like they're halfway there. Like it's, and they're still trying to pay off the silly financial decisions, unfortunately they made at a young age.
I mean, it's a lazy cop-out.
It is. It really is. And it's like, but like, as you said, like society is like, you have to do that. You have to go to this prestigious university and accept all the things that come with, but it's like, okay, like, does that, like, not only does that prepare you, it really just sets you back. And 1 out of 5% of borrowers have depression, which is another thing. Like mentally, like there's also all these connections of, not only do you have delayed life events, 80% of them have delayed life events, 31% delayed marriage, 26% of them delay, sorry, I'm throwing facts out, but 26% delay buying their first home. Some of them are depressed. And it's just like, okay, like you really tell me that's the lifestyle I want to live? I don't know if I want to be a homeless, depressed, unmarried dude.
Sounds
it just
terrible.
doesn't sound fun to me.
And how evil is it that these people, this authoritarian aspect of culture and society says you need me, and then jack up the prices so you need to go hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that you're not going to pay off for probably 20 years, not going to retirement. And then they make all the money, and then they're retiring on a beach house or on a yacht and doing whatever they want.
And here's the thing, right? They like, especially in debt, it's like you can't really use that to go start a business, right? For a lot of young people, it's a lot harder to get their hands on capital, right? To actually go build something, right? Or go launch themselves in the real world. And, that's actually what's really frustrating is, I love entrepreneurship. I think that any ambitious young guy should dip their feet in the water, at least just go try something. If they fail, great, right? You learn a lot.
You learn something.
You learn a ton. But, our system doesn't allow for that. And, we're in America, this beacon of innovation, this beacon of freedom, this beacon of, social mobility, right? But all this does, going back to the college regime, is I think it does enhance the wealth gap, right? It preys on people that want to get ahead, right? That want to create a life for themselves, that want to enjoy a retirement, that want to enjoy a family. And it really preys on those people, and it sets them back to where they can't amount to anything because they simply don't have the financial ability to do so.
And they're banking on your confusion as a human being, thinking that you need them.
No, it's so sad, right? Because that's what our country was founded on, right? If you read like the Declaration of Independence, right? Like quite literally the piece of paper that said, hey, like, we're going to go do America. Like, we're going to do
the America thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woo, like, go America, like eagles and everything.
Yeah.
So what is it? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you look at those three things that are, foundational to, what this country is. I really do think the college debt crisis really enables the latter. You can't really go pursue what you want to pursue if you're really stuck in a deep hole that you have to climb out of. And it's like I said, it's sad because I want to see people innovate, right? I want to see people build big things. I want to see people accomplish that and live up to their potential. I think so many smart people, right, fall into this, this lie of going and getting a bunch of debt for themselves that otherwise it's like, wow, like you could really do big things and you have the ability to.
And I would say the narrative is flipped. I've already mentioned this in this podcast a couple times, but it's the idea right now is I don't know what I'm going to do. Therefore, I'm going to go into college debt, and therefore I'm going to go figure out what I can do in this through this institution. They're going to teach me. Versus I'm going to figure out what I want to do, and if I have a set plan and you can completely back it up, okay, at least you can justify spending that much. I mean, really, you can't justify it because it's a broken system and it's so expensive. But I would say it's flipped. At least know what you're going to do before you take one step after you graduate high school.
But that's the thing. A lot of kids don't know what they're going to do, right?
Yeah.
A lot of students don't. A lot of kids are 18 and, they don't know, and it's okay.
It's totally
right?
okay.
It's okay to not know what you're going to do. But this is also a system that really preys on that. And for a lot of kids, they don't know what they were going to do. Let's just go to college and figure it out. Let's go explore ourselves. Let's go have this college experience.
And figuring things out is free.
Exactly.
But college is not free.
Exactly.
Your brain was given to you by God. He says, you're welcome.
Yeah.
This is why you don't have to go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt, because you can say, wait, I could figure this out for free and I don't need a college professor that is making less than I paid to go to this school, and we're showing up the exact same hours. It's just sad.
But here's the outcome for a lot of kids. It's like, okay, they go in the system, they get a degree, right? They are in debt. They go take a job. 41% of jobs taken by college graduates are not a job that they necessarily need a degree for. So they're kind of underemployed. And so it's like, wait a second, you're telling me 41% of people that graduate with a college degree end up working a job they didn't need a college degree for.
So they got in their own way on that.
So they got in their own way. And so, some of these people aren't making a ton of money. They have debt. They're not being able to pay. And a lot of their reasoning of how to fix this and their logic is, why don't we go back to college, get more debt, double down, so that then we can go get a higher salary or a higher paying job. Sometimes that works out for people. Other times it doesn't. And then, it's like, you're a byproduct of this predatory system that I think in a lot of ways we could prevent very easily in sending kids to, but we still do. And, they feel like a victim. And in a lot of ways they are. Like, as much as I want to say, like, dude, sucks for you, right? You made that bad decision. They weren't informed. And so I think the bigger problem in our society is we're not informing young people that, hey, there is a other way. There's another way. You don't have to do the same way that's gonna hurt you. Like if you want to have ambitions to go do something with your life, if you want to have ambitions to start a family, if you want to have ambitions to make an impact, in our culture here or a culture abroad, you can do that. If you want to do big things, you can do that.
And you don't have to wait. I feel like a lot of people say, I want to do this. And I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it? And they're like, I want to go to college first. It's like, why?
Yeah.
And so I just wish everybody that's listening to this, I want to, and Harrison, you can speak to this, but there has to be something. And I think it really just comes down to thinking more and spending time thinking, okay, what do I want to do with myself? What do I want to do with my life? What are the opportunities at hand and how can I utilize those? But there just has to be something to maximize the time when you're still young without going to college. There just has to be a way to do it. And I would say it is the answers in the question, which is just go and do it.
Yeah.
If we have to figure out a way to go and do it, the only way to figure out how to go and do it is to go and do it.
No, I think like once you go and pursue something, whether it's a business, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, how to fix something, right?
Yeah.
The best way in a lot of ways is just going and doing it. It's like what Nike said, right? Their tagline is just do it.
Just do it. It's like cliff jumping.
Yeah. And I know cliff
well, into water.
Yes.
And not more than a certain length. I don't condone
cliff jumping is really fun.
I
love cliff jumping.
Define cliff jumping is fun if it's in a safe-ish environment.
Yeah,
as long as you'll survive, it's fun.
No, like into water, obviously.
Into water and not like 200 feet.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll say something and I'll like specifically like cut off, like not finishing what I'm going to say while I'm cliff jumping, right? And like I'll be in the middle of a conversation and then I'll
just run.
I'll just run. They get so confused and then I'm hanging off the cliff. And
dude, did you ever see?
I'm giving them a cliffhanger. Max is like, you please leave,
bro. That was so bad, but I don't know how to handle that. But that was pretty funny. That was good. Did you ever see that video of that guy that was like, it's like the record high dive?
No,
bro, it was so high, and he just dove and just did it.
Like is like higher than the amount of student debt accumulated in the United States.
No, not that high.
Okay.
No. Okay, wait, Harrison, have you shared the stat on how much it is?
It's $1.7 trillion in the US.
Put that into, like, quantify that.
I think it's almost a number you can't. I think that every person in the United States, which is like 360 million, somewhere around there, that's about $5,000 per person. Like, it's just like, that's a number that's like, and like, I want to say it's like half of the EV or like the enterprise value of Apple, which doesn't really do it justice, right? I think that it's really hard to even understand that because like, you don't even understand how big Apple is.
Apple's massive. I mean,
but it's like, but you quantify that. It's like, oh, I can just take half of Apple, get rid of it,
distribute it to
everyone. No problem, right? It's like the.
So and then even then, how much is the government going into debt?
It's like more than the GDP of 95% of countries, right? It's a big number.
Where is this going?
Yeah, so I think it is, like we said earlier, it's going to the administrative costs. I don't know if I gave the statistic, but the administrative costs at universities since the 80s has grown, like 60%, as opposed, or I guess staffers, right? Staffers at universities is about 60%.
There has to be something deeper than that, though. Like $1.7 trillion is just going so they could have people sitting behind a desk.
Yeah, there's other reasons, right? Big building. Like, maybe there's some like boogie monster man sitting in the back corner accumulating all of it. We don't
probably.
Know. I don't know. Like,
that's what I would think. I want you to have the answer to that.
No, I don't know.
Do your research, Harrison. No, I'm
kidding. There's a lot of places, and I think I answer that. I think it's bloat, right? And it's like a government, right? It's like, have you ever been to the DMV?
Yes.
Isn't it like terrible, right? There's no efficiencies.
There's some nice people, but other than that, it's just an inefficient system.
It's really hard to innovate in a system that has a lot of bloat. And so you're saying about
what is bloat?
Bloat is essentially when, it's like, you know what bloat is, right? It's like when you eat and you feel bloated.
I'm saying put that into a financial economic perspective.
So when my company it's interesting. They say that the square root of, this is a fun little economic fun fact. They say the square root of the amount of employees you have is actually the people doing 90% of the work. And so they actually think this is an economic theory. So like I worked at a corporate company with I think we had 20,000 employees over across the US. And I mentioned that earlier. I was on the growth team, and I was with the E team and all the people actually running the company. And I would actually say that's true even to a company that big, that most decisions that
And this was the medical company you
this was
worked
yeah,
for.
and I would say that most of the decisions made, and the floor that I worked on and made by the people that I was around did impact whether the company would live or not live, right? And so I think once you start growing, you do have inefficiencies, no matter how much you can optimize it. If that holds true, that the square root of however many employees you have, that the square root of that is the only one actually making the decisions, right, and actually moving the needle. When you have massive institutions like this, there is going to be overhead and there is going to be bloat that you probably don't need.
Yeah, and so I do think it is a competitive thing with universities. I mean, you mentioned it, but the reason that they're accumulating all this debt is so that they can build their own establishment to be
Yeah, and you
better
have
than the one next door.
endowments. Yeah, and you have endowments that can assist and affiliate that. And an endowment is just a fancy word that's mostly private universities. So like, I think either Yale or Harvard has the biggest one. Harvard has about $53 billion. That's, most of these endowments that are actually awesome people. Like all the endowment people that I've met are actually like really cool. They're not, most of them are nothing like they don't feel like you're talking to an academic. It's almost like just talking to like a hedge fund dude, right? And that's effectively how they
Hedge fund people are cool, by the way, for those of you that don't know.
I think so, yeah.
For the most part.
I think so. But yeah, I mean, they run their endowments like massive hedge funds. So, I have one of my best friends actually works at the endowment of one university. They have about $11.3 billion they manage, which is a pretty big endowment.
Pretty big, yeah.
And, they have two sides. They have a public equity side where they, invest in public markets. So think of like bonds or stocks or, going to and putting a bunch of cash in Nvidia because it's just blowing up.
Yeah.
Or Tesla or
That
whatever.
was smart 6 months ago.
Yeah, maybe like if 6 years ago you'd have been genius.
True.
And then they have like a private investment fund where they invest in startups, or specifically venture funds. So they are kind of like the liquidity providers, or they provide cash for other kind of
So essentially they just
investment.
believe in a project, so they throw a bunch of money at it and hope
Pretty
to get a
much, yeah,
return.
and that's how a lot of these universities sustain and offset costs. I think Harvard, for example, 33.3, right, about 1/3 of their administrative overhead or their expenditures are actually paid for by their endowment. And so for a lot of private universities specifically, if you don't have a big endowment, right, you might suffer long term. And so that's actually, you're kind of seeing that a lot in the higher academia world, or the higher education world, is more of an emphasis in the word endowment being used more of almost a necessity to survive.
And even this is kind of leaping off of that topic a little bit.
Yeah.
But even the way where people are giving so much money, and it's all people that went through this higher education system. And they were like, well, I'm going to give a bunch of money to Harvard. I'm going to give a bunch of money to Princeton. It's just, there's such a...
People are giving back. I know of one gentleman, I won't mention his name, but he, there's a big article, it was in the news, is he was a Harvard HBS guy.
Harvard Business School.
Just stop, giving to them. And it was kind of a big deal because the man is, he's up there in wealth wise. Mm-hmm. And so you hear kind of all of this specifically out of the Gaza, like the Palestinian, Israel conflict, right? And the spew of anti-Semitism across a lot of universities, no matter what side of that position you take and that issue you take, there has been a rise of anti-Semitism. And if you disagree with that, I would just say, look at how many big time donors to a lot of prestigious universities have pulled back their investments and their donations to these universities as a result of that. And so what happens? I don't know. Like, do universities raise their prices and does the cost of tuition go up to some of these schools?
What does
Maybe.
that tell you? What does that tell you that
I don't
they
know
pull?
though.
What does that tell you that when they pull their funding based on the Palestine-Israel conflict? What does that tell you about?
I think it's
But what
fed
does that
up.
tell you about traditional education
Yeah,
and those
I
systems?
think
And
they're
what does that
fed
tell you about the
up. Yeah,
people?
I think that for a lot of guys that it just shows they're fed up, right? They're fed up in a system where, or the pursuit of not having, of going back, right? Going back to what my buddy said about my friend who runs the economic department of a university. It's these cesspools of insecurity that if you go against this collective thought, you are now the bad guy.
What is the collective thought?
I think anything that is undefined yet extremely defined. So, I think that we could go into the rise of postmodernism, of basically the absence of objective morality, which is, basically
Basically,
things,
anything's true.
everything's true.
Anything and
Yet,
everything.
if you hold a position, right, that's against this collective narrative, right, that is, maybe a little bit more conservative in nature, there's pushback against that, right? And so that's not really on the topic of debt. That's probably a conversation for another time. But I think that what we could see as an outcome of this is, for a lot of universities that aren't managing their funds in a manner that, can promote sustainability and growth, you will see tuition prices continue to rise because universities will have to do that. If I'm a university, right, and I just spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the development of new buildings, right? And I don't have any way to pay for that, right? And I don't have the biggest donor base. Or an extreme example of I've just, ticked off all my donors and now they're not giving me money because, I'm not, for ideological reasons. All right, how am I going to pay for things, right? The only logical way is to increase pricing, further setting kids back. And so, or firing people, which is just as hard, right? Because there's these little micro, not even real unions, right? But this union thought of if I go down, we all go down, walk out. And
It's very cultish.
it is. No, that's the word they said. It is
It's
extremely
such a cult.
cultish.
I just think, especially with, higher education, the college regime, it's like there's some standards of innate human value that somebody gets when they go to a certain college. And that's what makes it,
It's all an ego, right? It's all this false sense of prestige, right? And here's the thing is that prestige, and this is going to be a cool clip because we can cut it or whatever. I'm going to say this a little over dramatic on purpose.
do it all you want.
But I think that, prestige is kind of this fake thing that we create in our society because prestige is really at its core value. Prestige is exclusivity, right? Without exclusivity, we wouldn't have prestige, meaning that if I can't be in this cohort, if I can't be in this little circle, right, I am outside of that. And when I'm inside of this circle, now I can feel good about myself because I can see all the people around me who kind of, it's like, it's kind of like, it's like being on the cool kid circle in high school, right?
Sitting at the lunch table.
Sitting at the lunch table. That's a perfect example of okay, I'm sitting at this this table and I am so cool. And I see everyone around me wanting to sit here, but I can't. And in a lot of ways, it's like, most kids don't really care about sitting on the lunch table. They like doing their own thing. And I think that, prestige is really just exclusivity. And it can be artificially, actually, I think, be created very easily. I think that, you even see that in whatever little circle you run in. It was actually C.S. Lewis, a Christian author, wrote one of my favorite pieces of literature ever. It was actually a commencement speech, actually at a university. It was King's University in England, a long time ago. But it was basically the concept of the inner circle where, I think prestige, right, or a desire to fit in is super coupled with having this desire to be in some kind of circle.
And it leaves you very vulnerable when you're looking up to be in a circle like that because you do anything. And especially whatever they tell you, even going into hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. If they say do that because it's cool and that's how you'll get into this prestigious club and this exclusive club, then what are you going to do? You're going to do it because you'll do absolutely anything.
And in C.S. Lewis's case, he says that the most happy people in the world are the people that don't even realize the circle's there. Which is
so good.
Which is so true. It's like, you see that as I don't really care. And, I look at my life. I remember It's actually, I was listening to a podcast by like an investor. He's actually Jewish. He's not Christian. Talk about, this memoir, this commencement speech that C.S. Lewis gave. And I remember listening to it, I was like, wow, like where in my own life do I have this kind of desire to fit in or this desire to be in this exclusive cohort, really to just make myself feel better?
Yeah.
And for so many people, it's like, I think it's this natural desire where we can kind of justify ourselves, right? We can kind of like fill in the box of our insecurities because of this. It's like, yeah, I might not be the best at this, or I might struggle with this, but I'm now in this big, cool selective circle.
Love circle.
Exactly.
Yeah, this culty love circle.
But like the premise of like, to your extent, like to another reason, why is college debt such a problem? I think it is because culturally we are so concerned with being in a cohort, whatever that may look like. We want to be in that cohort. And, one of the byproducts of that instinctual human desire is now $1.7 trillion in student debt.
Wow. College debt.
Yeah, I think that's it. I could probably rave off a couple more stats, but I think
Not
that's
needed.
I don't think it's, yeah.
I hope you guys got the point. Fascinating. Harrison, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, well, this is fun.
This
We
was
need an
very fun.
outro song. We need to figure something out.
We do. Not the one that we were talking about in the first episode.
No,
at
I
the
could
beginning.
I could sing one though. Do you want me to sing one?
No, don't sing
Okay.
one. You're good. Maybe you can, like, we can bring a keyboard and you can play us out one day,
Okay, cool.
but only if I let you. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
All right. Appreciate you guys.
All right, later.